Connor O'Gara joining us, our friend from Saturday Down South. Give him a follow on Twitter at CJ O'Gara. Connor, I don't know if you saw the end of the Tennessee-Arkansas baseball series in which Tony Vitello and Dave Van Horn had a couple of interesting exchanges. That is a mentor and a mentee who it looks now like we've got a nice rivalry on our hands, although Arkansas and Tennessee don't play every year. I'm trying to remember in my mind, and I can't. Like, there's so much talk about Nick Saban against his former assistants, and nobody can ever beat him, and who's going to be the first one to do it and all that. I don't remember any moments where any of those former assistants and Nick Saban had one of those incredibly public, heated, on-field moments with the cameras watching like we saw yesterday. Can you?
No, the only thing that I can think of that's comparable is Saban and Lane Kiffin, who is a future Saban disciple at that point, because obviously at the time when he's still on his staff, you can't call him as a Saban disciple yet. But the blow-ups that they would have on the sidelines where, Saban would pretty much just rip into Kiffin. And, there was a little bit of that tension with all the things that Kiffin was doing to modernize Alabama's offense. But you don't do that to Saban. I mean, it's just different. Like, even Jimbo's comments that, of course, went very, very viral, and Saban had the response of, oh, what's he going to beat us in golf? Even that, I think people kind of scoff at because you just don't talk to Saban in that sort of way. But maybe that's what's missing. I mean, maybe that's why his assistants are 23-0, or 0-23 rather, against Saban, and maybe that's just kind of the juice that's needed to take him down.
And I really do think that at the heart of the disagreement between coaches Vitello and Van Horn, it probably had to do with recruiting. And I think that look, there are all sorts of reasons why head coaches that compete against each other can get crossways. Some of it can be things that happen during the game, the way their team plays, that kind of stuff, words that are said about programs and coaches. But really, I mean, does anything ever tick off a head coach more than what he might view as, I don't know, like negative recruiting against him, or those recruiting? Those are always the ones that really seem to can really spark awesome rivalries.
And I think we see that in basketball too. I feel like the handshake line in basketball is usually something with college coaches that gets taken pretty seriously. But I mean, coaches are aware of that too. Like, I like it when they're able to kind of show that emotion. They show that something bothers them, because if somebody is negatively recruiting against you, then you have to be able to kind of stand up for yourself in those moments. But I think we're missing a little bit of that on-field juice between SEC coaches, and part of it was because, last year we had, 4 Saban disciples in the league? And then when you add Saban in, 5 of the 14 coaches are directly, associated with Saban. So I think that we're due for some of that bad blood between coaches. And, given how competitive I think the SEC West is going to be this year, maybe we'll see some of that.
Connor O'Gara joining us here on Halftime. Connor, the new ACC commissioner, Jim Phillips, and the new Pac-12 commissioner, George, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce this guy's last name, Kliavkoff.
No, you have to try to pronounce last name.
Kliavkoff.
Part of the fun.
There you go. That's getting there. I haven't gotten there yet, but you sound just fine for now.
Wait, last week, Connor, you were Mr. Pronunciation with Henry to O, and now you can't help with George Kliavkoff?
Come on, Connor.
Yeah, I'm falling behind. I'll do a little bit more. I'm not in form when it comes to the new names in Power 5, and whatnot. Part of that is actually because my Twitter account is currently suspended, and I might have to start a new Twitter account. That's a long story for a different time. So, like, even when you say at CJ O'Gara at the tweet, that might be temporarily. So that I'm going to use that as my excuse as to why I'm a little bit out of the loop with some of the pronunciation, some of the developments of the last week.
Fair enough for me. But when you bring up these two new commissioners for each of these leagues, both of them have differing opinions on playoff expansion. Connor, do you are we realistically going to be seeing some playoff expansion here soon in the next 2, 3, 4 years? Because you can make arguments for both sides. We could talk about this for hours, but what says you? Do you think changes are on the horizon?
Yeah, and I think it's going to happen before the contract is up. 2025. I think that we're going to get there. Maybe this year and next year we'll be stuck with this system. And I don't want to say stuck. That's the wrong verb. But I think we'll be locked into this system, and then maybe 2023 that begins to change. Teams have certainly scheduled like it is going to change. If you look at all these, and that's probably the best indicator on why athletic directors feel that it's coming. But you look at the way that they've scheduled their non-conference matchups. There are programs like Georgia that all of a sudden, like by the middle of the decade, they're going to be having like 11 games against Power 5 teams. There are going to be those wild card spots that are up for grabs. It's no longer going to be, you have to, it's one loss or bust. And, these 2-loss teams are pretty much out of it unless they have 2 unbelievable wins. But I think we're heading in that direction, and I understand why they have different viewpoints, too. I mean, if you're the ACC, you're like, hey, this is the tournament that we've been able to get into every single year. Why would we want to allow this so that, the Pac-12, which hasn't been in 2016, why would we allow a new system for them to be able to have a better chance? But we in the college football world are a bit stale with this. You look at all the different teams who continue to win their Power 5 leagues, and I'm leaving the Pac-12 out of this because they have yet to have the one-loss team, at least, not including 2020 with the reduced schedule. But, you look at Oklahoma, which, Oklahoma hasn't lost the conference since, 2014, or 2015, whatever it was. Alabama, they didn't win the conference in 2017. They didn't win the conference in 2019. They've won the conference all those other years. Ohio State has won the conference every year since 2017. Clemson won the conference every year since 2017. No wonder we're not seeing any variance in this. And then you add a Notre Dame, and it's like, yeah, this is boring, and that's why it's gotten to that point. But it does feel like it's imminent, and it seems like everybody is sort of bracing for that to happen before the contract's up.
But I guess from my standpoint, Connor, when you talk about playoff expansion, Alabama's the best team in the SEC. Like you mentioned, some of the same teams that are getting in over and over and over again, which I get. Yes, it is monotonous, it's stale, and I get that. But don't you think the same outcome will come if you have 8 teams or 12 teams or whatever? I mean, the best teams are supposed to win these things, and I guess the other teams just need to pick up the slack and pick up from where I'm picking up. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think that. I mean, that's the big thing that I come back to. If you're a believer that expansion is going to change the result, I think you're in the wrong place. I mean, it's probably not going to. We've seen during the playoff era, since 247 Sports started tracking talent composite ranking, the teams who have won a playoff game, just won a playoff game and gotten to the championship, there's only been one team that was ranked outside the top 10. And then 2/3 of the teams who have won a playoff game have been in the top 5 in their respective class in terms of talent composite rankings. In other words, if you don't have one of those elite teams in terms of, blue chip talent galore, you're not winning a playoff game. And Oklahoma wasn't even there until in the top 10 until a couple of years ago in that department. So when they're getting blown out in the playoff games, it's like, yeah, well, that's why that's happening. But there are so few teams that actually have a chance to be able to win a playoff game that I think we forget that this sport doesn't exactly yield the randomness of college basketball. It just doesn't. And because there's such a talent disparity, and because the better team is going to win the vast majority of the time in college football, there's just not going to be that same sort of atmosphere. Now, am I okay with expansion? Absolutely. Because if it means having some of these increased storylines, sure, that's fine. And the bowl system is going to suffer as a result of that. But at the same time, if we're sitting here holding our breath on playoff expansion to yield different results, I just think that we've got our priorities in the wrong place.
See, Connor, that's the reason I'm willing to accept. I never hear that reason coming from athletic directors or conference commissioners. It's always about, save the bowl system. It's about academic calendars. It's about number of games being played. It's never about the fact of the matter that college football is the chalkiest sport around, and that even if you do add another, who knows, another 12 teams into it, like those extra 12 teams really don't have that much of a chance to beat the top 4. So that's the reasoning I'm willing to accept, not the other crap, which is the stuff I always hear.
Agreed. And I think it's one of those things where if you just want to see some different things, and you just want to be able to, like, if you're a Georgia fan, or better yet, if you're a Florida fan and you want to say, hey, we have a chance to play for a playoff berth in the last week of November, then that's something that you hold on to in a different sort of way. I think that's really what they're trying to go for if they're talking about expansion, because we thought that maybe, hey, things are getting a little bit too stale with the BCS formula, and it's just cranking out SEC teams left and right. We need to be able to figure out a new formula so that we have more variance. There's been more variance. There hasn't. It's simply been a matter of who gets into the field and what does that fourth team look like. And is that fourth team maybe the occasional, Notre Dame, which hasn't always been there, whatever it is. It just hasn't yielded the variance that many were hoping for. And I don't necessarily think that expanding to 8 is all of a sudden going to change the winner. But, if you just want to have a couple more of those teams in there just so that they can go home and say that, that's fine. I'm just not betting on different results.
Right, and that's where I am too. Connor, appreciate you, man. As always, thanks for your time, your expertise, your words, your pronunciations, and attempts at them, and we'll do it again next week.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, guys.
You got it. What was that? What was the Pac-12 commissioners, and what is this? Clavicle?
George Clavicle.
Clavikoff. I like George Clavicle a lot better. It's a lot easier to pronounce.
Sounds good to me. He's in the Pac-12 where nobody matters.
He comes from the land of casinos. He is a casino media executive, taking over for a former executive in Larry Scott, who basically got everybody to forget that the Pac-12 ever existed. So good luck with that. 877-377-6963 as we get into the last segment of our first hour. And nobody's with us in the second hour except Sunshine, that's Jason Carroll, SmackDown, Master Travis, and the cat, who apparently is really angry at Jason for some reason.
What'd he do?
I don't know. We'll be back.